It's past 7 o'clock, so I'll call the meeting to order and ask everyone to rise and face the flag, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this point, which is the new normal, we open it up for public comments. Anybody who has something to talk about that's not on the agenda, now would be the time to do it. We used to take care of it at the end of the meeting, but it seems to be more helpful than deal with it at the beginning of the meeting. Are there any comments in the room or online for something that's not on the agenda? Seeing and hearing nothing, we'll move on to approval of the minutes from July 9th, 2024. There were only 3 of us here for that meeting.
I'll move to approve minutes 7/9/25.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's 3-0 with 2 abstentions. At this point, it's my privilege to welcome Kathleen and Seth here. This is our legislative delegation, and I'm going to try to limit this to half an hour.
Great.
If people want to speak or ask a question, we'll try to keep that to 3 minutes. This is all in keeping with the new select board rules. If somebody's going to speak, have me recognize you, and then you can speak to Kathleen or Seth or direct it to me. But I will try to keep the conversation focused through me, just in case. I don't think it's going to get out again. But, those will be the very easy set of rules that we're dealing with. Hi, Kathleen. How are you?
Good, Ivan. Great. So I've actually, thanks for having us. I've been looking forward to coming. And Seth and I got together a little bit ahead of time and divided up how we wanted to give you guys and whoever is watching, and I hope folks watch this, on their own time as well, a recap of the 2024 legislative session. I don't think anybody here is going to be surprised to hear me say that it was by far the hardest year during my time in the legislature. I think that people all over the state are very rightly concerned about affordability. So people are very concerned about making sure that Vermont is a place where we can all afford to buy and own a home, a place where we can send our kids to childcare and send them to excellent schools, where we can afford health care, where we can support small businesses. And that topic really dominated the conversation this year, and it should have. It rightly should have. And the biggest flashpoint, I think, for that conversation, again, quite rightly, was property taxes. And so I wanted to start out talking tonight about that. Seth and I have been talking and writing about property taxes since before the session even started, because many folks saw this coming. We've spent a lot of time trying to talk to constituents about this, and it's still a very tough topic to talk about because education funding in Vermont has a kind of a catch-22 dynamic built into it, which is that local school boards develop the budgets, and local voters debate and approve those budgets, at town meeting or by Australian ballot. So every year in March, we have school boards working really hard to bring responsible budgets to voters. Voters are approving those budgets all over the state, right? And at that point, the baton kind of passes to the legislature. And the role of the legislature is to add up the sum total of all of those school budgets and then raise enough revenue to pay for it. That's our job. We are required to make sure that every school budget approved by voters around the state gets the money that its voters approved, and that every dollar comes back to that district. And the legislature really only has a couple of levers that we can try to adjust to do that. we have property taxes. Property taxes pay for our schools. That's what school property taxes are for. They pay for our schools. So we have to set the rate for both homestead and non-homestead property taxes at a rate sufficient to make sure that there's enough money in the education fund to fund all the school budgets that we all approved. There are also other revenue sources that come into the education fund, and we can try to tinker with those too. So that's the sales and use tax and lottery revenues, things like that. And I know this sounds like kind of 101 or very basic, but I find that a lot of people think that the legislature is somehow, I guess, controlling property tax rates, and it's not so much that. It's that the budgets are what they are, and we're required to raise enough money to fund them. So this year, for a combination of reasons, and we've kind of called it a perfect storm, school spending shot up all over the state. And at one point in December, it looked as though more than $200 million was going to be added to the education fund. That is a huge property tax spike. School boards were starting to work on their budgets, and all over the state, they were sending in preliminary numbers. And it looked as though school property taxes were going to have to go up by as much as 20, 21, 22% in order to fund those budgets. So what are we going to do about that? That's obviously, I would definitely call that a crisis. So the legislature got to work, and we spent the next 6 months doing everything we could to meet our obligation to fund those budgets while trying to bring property tax rates down. So what did we do in order to do that? We used a responsible amount of reserves. We do have reserves in the education fund. We used some of them. We had extra revenues that were projected to come in over and above budget. We applied every single one of those dollars. We did do a $25 million one-time transfer from the general fund, which we try usually not to do, but this year was what I would call a crisis. And we also enacted a tax on short-term rentals, a 3% surcharge that people pay when they book like an Airbnb. So the Airbnb owner isn't the one paying that. We're not taxing the property owner. When you book a short-term rental and you pay that, the tax, right, to the state that you pay when you check out, we boosted that up. So folks who are booking Airbnb visits in Vermont are going to be paying a little bit more. That brought more dollars into the education fund, which allowed us to drop property taxes. So every one of those things that I talked to you about, property taxes were expected to be here. We added the reserves. We added the one-time transfer from the general fund. We added the short-term rental tax. We added the surplus revenue, and we were able to bring property taxes down to a 13% increase. That is hardly a victory, right? That's not really the good news, but it's as much as we were able to responsibly do. So the bill that we passed set those tax rates. As I mentioned, the legislature doesn't have the ability to just say, hey, you're going to spend less. We got to raise the money we're told to raise. So what are we going to do going forward? And I will say tax rates in our district came out to be about that too. The average property tax increase in Manchester, our tax rate went up 12.8%, I believe, our property tax rate. So right at that state average. You know, exacerbated, of course, by the fact that we reappraised and people's home values are going up. So this is, I think, what we would call an unsustainable situation. I think everybody in this room supports our schools. Everybody in this room wants excellent schools. We all want to support our school budgets. But I think we all know that property taxpayers, homeowners, Vermonters can't afford to pay a 13% tax increase once, let alone year over year. So we have got to, I would say, fix a broken system. We did as much as we could this year. I've had people ask me a very great question, why didn't you do more this year? Why didn't you overhaul the system this year? And what I would say is that education funding is a very complicated system, and to try to overhaul a system like that in 2 months leaves way too much room for error with the tax bills that we all have to pay, with all of our school districts, with all the school budgets. A process like that takes time, and more importantly, it takes regular Vermonters to be involved. So we did one thing to control costs this year. We did bring back the excess spending threshold. That's a cost containment mechanism that we put into this bill that'll be in place for budgets this coming year. So we've got a cost containment mechanism in there now. The excess spending threshold sets a per pupil amount that we consider to be okay. You know, I don't know what the Agency of Education will say that amount is going to be. And districts who choose to spend more than that really get dinged on their tax rate. And when we used to have that excess spending threshold in place, you would see districts work very, very, very hard to stay under it. So it's kind of like trying to put a cap on spending, right? So that mechanism is going to be in place for this upcoming school year. We also have, we stood up a Blue Ribbon Commission. People always make fun of the legislature for doing studies, but if you want to do good work and you want to make sure that you're not going to have unintended consequences, sometimes you really have to take time to do it right. So we have an action plan due to us for short-term education spending cost containment measures this December that we'll act on next year. And we have a major report on overhauling our education funding system due to us the year after that for action in 2026. It's going to be a public process, and there will be a public hearing at some point in Bennington County. I really hope people get involved, because the things that we're going to have to do if we really want to rein in education spending and bring down our property tax rates are going to be tough conversations. Okay, these are not going to be easy things. And personally, I don't think they're decisions that the legislature should make. We're talking about consolidating schools, closing small schools, building newer and fewer, smaller class sizes, figuring out a way to fund the mental health needs of our students that doesn't come at property taxpayer expense. There's a community schools model that would have, for example, the budget for UCS, you know, going up through the general fund, much broader tax base. And then you see UCS cite itself in all of our schools, and then that comes out of the school budget. So I don't want to get too deeply into the weeds. I know I'm talking a lot about this, but as far as I'm concerned, property taxes were in one way what this session was all about. It's what the next biennium is going to be about. We are doing our best, and I've been doing my best, and I know Seth has, to listen to everybody's concerns and try to explain this really complicated education funding system that we have. I had some other things I wanted to talk about, but that went longer than I thought. So Seth, why don't you come on up? Yeah.
Scott told us 5 minutes, and I looked to make sure I was talking for 5 minutes.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, I didn't mean, that wasn't what I meant. I'm only telling you why I'm going to read this quickly. So Scott wanted me to talk about Act 250 and the Act 250 bill and housing in particular as it relates to what I'm on Environment and Energy Committee. We are the committee that deals with land use regulation, and because of that, we're deeply involved in housing. Because housing is so related to land use regulation. So it's an enormous, so we passed a really landmark rewrite of Act 250 this year. A lot of it's the same, but there are some huge differences from the way that the law was initially put together that came out of this process. I worked on the bill all summer, all fall last year, and then all through the winter. It came through my committee. I was one of the two sponsors of the bill. I worked on it with Amy Sheldon from Middlebury. So when Act 250 was passed 54 years ago, there really was limited planning and zoning in Vermont. So Act 250 really had to do everything. Act 250 looked over the shoulder of towns as development took place and made sure that it was done right. But what's happened now over the last 50 years is a lot of Vermont towns have, with the aid of highly functioning regional commissions, many towns have developed strong planning, zoning bylaws, subdivision regulations, and the apparatus to make it function, Manchester being a great example. So when people complain about the duplication of the system where the town makes a decision, then it's looked at again by Act 250, and sometimes Act 250 goes, they have a point. But what happened is that that's the way it worked for a long time, and it took a long time to make it change. We finally did that this year, and I'll get to that in a minute. So every planning principle says that we should do everything we can to encourage housing in our downtowns. Housing in downtowns produces vibrant communities, and it reduces the want for sprawl. Not everybody wants to live in downtowns, but a lot of people do. And it's walkability, access to services, don't need your car for everything. You can walk to the grocery store, those kinds of things. And it's also what produces enough population, especially in the core where downtown businesses, coffee shops, restaurants, et cetera, are successful. So every planning principle says, do everything you can to get housing in downtowns. And so that was one of the underlying themes for the bill. One of the tensions that creates in Vermont is that our towns are built on rivers. And now, with the new normal, where we have a 100-year flood every few years, that creates kind of a tension in a lot of, and we're seeing that play out, of course, in a lot of towns across Vermont, with the exception of some of the people on Richville Road. We've largely escaped, but it hits different places, different times. So that creates a tension. So we have the reality that. So then we also have I'm setting this up, so by the way, so stick with me. We have the reality that some towns have sewer and water service, and some towns only have sewer or water, and many have neither. So with that kind of background, the bill has 4 major components. It does 4 key things. It attempts to fix Act 250 governance by creating a professional board to oversee the process. There's been a lot of talk over the years about inconsistent decisions from one part of the state versus another. You get one opinion from a coordinator here and a different one here. There really hasn't been good governance of the Act 250 process, and we're trying to, with this bill, create uniformity in decision-making. And one of the provisions, by the way, with the board, it's a 5-member board, professional board, and one of the provisions that I got in there that I'm really kind of like is a provision that says no 2 of those 5 can be from the same county. So it's not just a Burlington-Montpelier axis, that the rural communities get representation on that board. And the second thing it does is requires regional commissions to create maps across the state utilizing the same criteria. So that when you look at the map from the regional commission map, or the land use map from Bennington County, and then you look at the one in Orange County, you'll see that they're kind of the same color coding. However they end up doing, what they end up doing with color coding, I don't know. But the same, so that you're able to look at maps across the state, and it begins to get some uniformity about decision-making about where we want, what we want where, and what we don't want where. And part of that process, there's a big public process built into this with the regional commissions and the towns working together to establish the parts of those maps that are obviously going to be in all of the towns. So those areas, the compact area, the downtowns, which is one of the components of the land use mapping, and I'll just use the term downtown loosely because it's called different things, but these areas will be established with the following in mind. Compact areas of communities that have sewer and water service. So this would be a lot of Manchester. One of the things Scott wanted me to hit on is what does this actually mean for Manchester? Areas that have sewer and water service will be eligible for what's called Tier 1 status. And towns that are Tier 1 towns, within those areas that are identified, you work with regional commissions, get those areas designated. Those, if you decide to become a Tier 1 town, by the way, everything's optional. You don't have to do any of that. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. But those areas are exempt from Act 250. And so therefore, getting back to that first point that I made about sometimes the duplication, because what we're really doing is making clear we want development in downtowns. And if we know that as a good planning principle, and you have towns that have the right apparatus in place to be able to do it, and they have the sewer and water investment, then it's safe, if you will, for Act 250 to just say, okay, within these areas, you do it. And then for towns that have only sewer or only water or the right soils, there's an opportunity to work with the commission and have those areas identified in a smaller town, maybe Arlington, parts of Arlington, to have what's called the 1B status. Actually, it's tier A. I got the tiers confused anyway. 1B status, which says that in those areas that get identified with those lesser infrastructure, you can build up to 50 units of housing without Act 250 review. So this is a bill to really, it's not saying you can't build anywhere else, but what it is saying is it's easier, we're making it easier to build in downtowns where I hope to everybody's mind, it makes sense to build housing to every extent that we can. And then fourth, it revamps the old designation program to align with the new regional mapping and reshapes the attendant grants. And part of the things we try to do with that realignment of the designation program is to make some of those grants and ability for aid from the state available to smaller communities. It used to be a little bit more targeted to communities that were more sophisticated, and we're trying to get it out to other. So, and just a couple more things. 3 years ago, because this all kind of relates, we passed a bill to make it possible to build infill development in flood hazard areas. And so here we are back at that tension. That bill built it with that tension as well. But one thing, just as a quick little education, there's a difference between floodways and flood hazard areas. Floodways are the raging river. Flood hazard areas are rising waters outside. And what we said, recognizing that we want development in downtowns, recognizing that tension, we said that where it's already built, a built environment, you can do infill development, even though you're in the flood hazard area, and obviously not the floodway, if you build to specs 2 feet above the 100-year flood level. So, and a great example of that being successful is the transit center in Montpelier, where the flood went right through and right by, but because it was built to those specs, they were open the next day. So that's one of the things we did just to, that's why we did that. That was a small bill, hasn't had a huge impact, but here and there it has. And the session before that, the middle bill that we did, which was last year, the year before last, S100, required towns to have areas with sewer and water to allow at least up to 5 units per acre, on the theory that that's a state huge state investment in that infrastructure in large lots where that investment has taken place. Really doesn't make sense, because that's downtown, and by the way, that's downtowns only, and to encourage full use of that infrastructure. So, so how will it affect Manchester? If the town decides, the town has a choice. I think you can clearly, I think you can meet the criteria. You have to do a couple of adjustments probably to your zoning regs or whatever, but with a couple of adjustments, the town can easily become, parts of the town can become 1A if that's what you want to do. You can choose to be 1B, or you can choose to do nothing. Nobody's forcing any of this on anybody, but I think that a town, frankly, a town like Manchester, my assumption is we'll probably want to explore having parts of town be 1A. And I can talk about more. I had on the list to talk about the renewable energy standard that the utilities and advocates got together and put together over the course of last summer, and with some adjustment we passed. Or I can talk about whatever else, but I want it to try to be brief. One other thing I'll say in terms of the session and the session report is that for everything else we're involved in, Kathleen and I probably spend half our time defending independent schools. And the network of, those areas that have school choice understand how it works and value it highly, and it produces unbelievable opportunity for the kids of the towns that they serve. School choice is and I actually wish I wasn't doing that. I'd much rather be spending my time on education. And I'm sure Kathleen would too. and focusing on all the kids of Vermont and all the kids in public and other schools, but we're forced in a defensive posture to constantly be pushing back against the attempts to undermine this system that we have, this unique system we have here that does no harm to anybody else, by the way, where kids have a choice, Burn, Burton, Long Trail, or Arlington if they want to. I want to just say one thing, because once in a while, Kathleen's maybe modest about this. When that commission was put together, they wanted to have no independent school representation. And I did what I could, but Kathleen was actually positioned to make it happen. We at least got one person on. We got one seat. But so we at least have a voice on that commission. And frankly, just the reality is Kathleen's responsible for that. So I'll stop there. Got tons more to say, happy to answer questions. Really. Yeah, I love talking about this stuff, by the way.
Everything that you spoke about is pretty important stuff. I will allow a little bit of bending of my own timetable if you think there's something else that we need to put on the table before I open it up to questions.
I'll say a couple more things as it relates to my work. And my committee and a counterpart, in a way there's two counterpart committees in the Senate. We've done a lot of major bills over the last couple of years, the 30 by 30, a 50 by 50 bill. The River Corridors bill this year, which takes a statewide river corridor, entirety of river corridor perspective, rather than looking at it town by town, because obviously what happens in one town affects the town next door. The renewable energy standard, which is looking to increase the amount of renewable energy that we generate in Vermont. That's the bill that was put together that all the power companies signed on to. They're major pieces of legislation, and I think that if I get elected to the Senate and I end up on the Natural Resources Committee, and I suspect I will. By the way, I'm on the House Natural Resources Committee initially because I made the mistake of telling the Speaker I understand Act 250, so even though I ended up, I think siting is going to be important, and I think that's going to be a major role for us to be looking at this year, siting of renewable energy. And I think and I've been talking to Amy Sheldon again from Middlebury, it's really now doing oversight of the bills that we've passed, because sometimes the legislature can pass major pieces of legislation, then they go off and they start being administered by the departments, and we kind of lose track of them. We both think the big goal for the next couple of years is going to be to really make sure that the intent with which we pass these things and the care that went into them and the exactitude gets followed through on, because we want to make sure there's good follow through, and there's follow through that tracks with what our intent was and what we were actually trying to accomplish. So I think rather than, in large measure, it relates to the environmental and housing and land use stuff, I think is going to be more making sure that we follow through on what we did and it's actually implemented properly than it is big sweeping new next round of changes. So.
Yes, Linda Benway has a hand up, or did you want to start questions from the table?
I'd like that.
Okay, Linda, hang on just a minute.
Well, if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for that. That was really very informative. It helped a lot to understand a lot of the complicated issues that you're both addressing. I didn't hear anything about the fossil fuel tax. Is that something that either one of you is prepared to discuss? I'd love to
Sure.
dig into that
You
one.
want to do it? You want me to?
There isn't one, so that would be a great place to start. Are you talking about the mythical 70 cents?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm very glad you asked.
Mythical is the key word.
Mythical is the key word. One of the hardest things about serving in the legislature sometimes is that, a piece of misinformation catches on fire and spreads, like wildfire, and all your efforts to correct it, it's hard to correct sometimes. But anyway, last year the legislature took up a bill called the Affordable Heat Act. And the idea behind the Affordable Heat Act is to briefly establish, it would establish a credit market, and companies that import fossil fuel into the state would need to earn credits, and they would do that by helping low and moderate income Vermonters basically save money on their heating fuel. So weatherize their homes, install splits, go to biofuels. So it's a fairly complicated idea. It's an idea that could have an impact on the price of heating fuel for sure. And it's an idea that could also wind up saving low and moderate income Vermonters and Vermonters of all income levels millions and millions and millions of dollars. So interesting idea. And the sort of factoid was put on the table that this could raise the price of heating fuel 70 cents. That was plucked out of thin air. But we lost control of that conversation, a long time ago, unfortunately. So the bill that we passed didn't enact this idea at all. Basically, what we did was we asked the Public Utilities Commission to do a really complicated study and also to basically build the program like as a draft. So why don't you write the rules for this? Let's see how it would work. See, how it would play out in Vermont. And then we commissioned a study that would show what kind of savings people would realize, whether it would impact the price of heating fuel, if so, how much, how many people would even take advantage of wanting to weatherize their homes, whether we have the workforce for it, basically every question you can think of about this complicated idea. And that study, a draft of that study is actually due next week. And then the final study will come out in December, and the draft regulations will be done in in December 2. And then all of that will basically get printed out and delivered to the next legislature to take a look at. They may think it's a good idea, but they need to tweak it this way or completely overhaul it to make sure it doesn't have a negative impact on the price of heating fuel. They may think it's not a good idea, and set it aside. I can promise you, being someone that works in the State House, there's not a legislator alive who would vote to raise the price of heating fuel 70 cents a gallon. That's very harmful. And so,
Can I put this,
yeah, go ahead. So
just add
anyway, we're waiting for the info to come back. We'll do, the next legislature will do something with it or nothing, or they'll tweak it to see if it makes sense for people.
Just another way to think about it is, there's no question that in the long run, once we're there, we'll save a hell of a lot of money if we do this. And Vermonters will save a hell of a lot of money. I've got solar panels at home. They were expensive in the short run. I don't have an electric bill. So it doesn't make sense for everybody because of the upfront cost, but if we're helping to ameliorate that and we're doing those kinds of things, there's no question in the long run, having control of our own future is in our best interest. The question is, what's the transition like? And how do we do the transition in a way that doesn't hurt people, and especially that actually helps people along the way? But we have to be careful about that, and that's what Kathleen is talking about. Thus the study, thus a totally new bill and a totally new vote, and we'll see. What we're getting is a study.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Can either of you speak to the non-homestead tax increase for transfer tax?
Yep.
And what that is designed for?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about the transfer
I'll
tax?
do it because it got
It's in the Act 250 bill.
tacked onto my bill. It's something that if it were up to me and Kathleen wouldn't be there.
We opposed it.
We tried to get it out. In fact, the earlier versions, we tried to modify it and make better, or at least get it out. But it got tacked on at the end. And this is the kind of situation we find ourselves in all the time. I don't know if I spent hundreds of hours on that piece of legislation, but it's something damn close to that. And a lot of people, and there was a lot of effort across Vermont with all kinds of people coming together to make that piece of legislation happen. The last minute, that little poison pill, if you will, got tacked on the end. in the grand scheme of things, we voted for the bill in the end because that was our choice. There was nothing we could do to get it out. I'll just leave it at that. It's not something that I would have done.
Yeah. To provide a little context too on the property transfer tax, it's interesting, the property transfer tax, that money, which is that one-time money you pay when you buy a property, those revenues feed the construction of affordable housing across the state. And what's really interesting is that over the years, in an effort to save money or to balance the budget or whatever, we always underfund the property transfer tax. We always underfund that transfer to the CBHCB. And we get now to a point where we have a housing crisis and we don't have enough supply. And, one of the things this happened long before the years and years of underfunding. That PTT transfer to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board long predates Seth and I, but it's one of those things that you look back and say, here we are now. Gosh, I wish we hadn't done that. But yeah, Seth is right. The property transfer tax, at first we got it yanked out. Then it went back in, and we got it configured so that anybody who bought a house less than $750,000 would save money. So anybody buying a home less than $750,000 would have paid less. And then more than $750,000, there would have been this marginal increase. And I was okay with that, actually.
You're talking about homestead or?
What we
or-
tried
It
to
was
do
for
as an
all
alternative.
properties.
Yeah.
And so that's how we sent it over to the Senate. And as things often happen, as Seth said at the last minute, it was made to apply only to second homes, and it's not even marginal. It's the whole value of the house. It's not what we would have wanted, and but
Do you have any sense that that might be reversed? Or could you see that happen?
I think that we can try, communities like ours can try to make the case, right? So you always want to see what impact it's having, if it's if it's putting a damper on second home sales, and try to make the case that it's harmful.
My initial reaction when you said that, I was going to say no. But I actually think that, it does happen. You can maybe modified might be the right term. Modified might, yeah, no, but modified might be the right term, because that does happen. There, complex pieces of legislation go through, and all kinds of things are going on.
And it was
sometimes
intended to
there's-
be marginal,
Yeah.
right? So that might
Yeah.
be where you start the argument. This should be a marginal rate. Then, of course, that's less money for housing. So that's always the push-pull, right?
Any other questions here at the table at this point? Linda, thank you for your patience. You're up.
Hi. Really, I just raised my hand because I want to ask all speakers to speak into the microphone, because I'm missing a lot of what's being said while I'm sitting here at home.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you didn't have
We
it.
have one.
Oh. There's a little one.
There's a little one, yeah.
I don't know if it's,
Yeah.
Well-
Linda, can you hear us?
I could hear Kathleen fine, but as soon as Seth stepped back from the microphone and was speaking, I missed a great portion of what he was saying. The microphone is fine, you just need to please speak into it.
Apologies.
That
Thank you very
microphone,
much.
The microphone that's up there is only for Gina.
okay, now we have another microphone on the table. Sorry
I'll
about
do
that.
it. I'll do it
Everybody
again.
who's on Zoom.
Seth wants to go again.
Okay, are there other questions? Yes, Steve.
I don't have questions, I have comments.
Could you move to the microphone so the people at home can hear you?
What I'm going to say, believe me, is in due respect, and I do appreciate, Kathleen, you reaching out to me. I've been real busy and sick, and Seth. These are not just my comments. The explanation of what you have done, which I appreciate, in voting party lines, to me, is disgraceful, disconcerting, and just baffling. The bottom line is you raised our taxes. The interpretation that you just have had of the fuel increase you feel is devastating. So would we all. Don't you think the 13% property tax increase you created is an issue? The excuses that you're giving us, I understand, but, you know, there's a lot of points to where I feel that you're bullying the taxpayers. You're not being upfront with them. You're using these excuses of the education tax. Well, we've heard this for years, and you've had plenty of time to fix it. And the legislature is the one that created the problem initially. And I know that the legislature had made a decision, and I think I'm right, that to basically buy these schools from the local areas and let them run it, the supervisory unions. Well, if they can't run it and control their budget, what can be done? You know, is it you all to step in and say, we need a change? We're going to control this. You slap us in the face with your budget every year, and we have to come up with the money. So where do we come up with the money? You know, right? Doesn't the school board, they present you what they need to run the schools?
They present local voters,
Right.
all of us,
Right.
the budget.
Okay, and then it's given to you all to come up with the money. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I
Well,
don't wanna get a
whoever, it
conflict
doesn't
of
matter.
interest. I mean, we'll keep track of your questions and try to get answers for them.
I think that, you know, that's a question of not just me, but if there's a problem, we need to fix it. And I understand it's not an easy fix, okay? I was fortunate to have attended the meeting in Montpelier where the vetoes were overridden. I did obtain the bills, Senate and House bills, and have read thoroughly those bills. I'm not taking sides. I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm for the taxpayer. And I expect the same thing to happen. You know, you vote in a sense to where you don't claim the certain party, but I'm here to tell you, if there were Republicans in that Senate and that House, and they voted the same way you did, I would be furious as well, and very concerned.
Steve,
And
we're over the limit as far as
okay,
how many minutes.
can I just finish? I just got
Thank you.
quick sec. I'm sorry it sounds harsh, but this is not just my visible perception and anger, but others, that you raised the taxes, and that's the bottom line with your taxpayers. My homestead, I lost $200 this year. My taxes went up $387, okay? So that's $587 for my 1,400 square foot home, okay? Where's that money gonna come from? I don't know. And I'm not the same person. I'm not the same, it's throughout the whole town, community. I am going to use a quote from Prince William recently. Quote, "Leave no one behind." And I think you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Maybe we should revisit, I know we talked about how the system works, and that local communities approve their school budgets, and then you're basically handed a bill that you have to find the revenue to fund. And in that system, there's a disconnect from what we approve for a budget and what ultimately gets handed back to us as a tax bill, because some towns are extremely austere and keep their budgets down, and other communities are extremely generous with what they want to spend on education, but the towns that are keeping their budgets down have to same tax rate that the ones that are coming up with these huge increases. And you mentioned something that's going to happen this coming year, which will help to remedy that situation. That's the way I understand it. If you could just touch on that again.
Yeah. Well, I think that the one important thing to understand is that per pupil spending is a really important part of the education funding calculation. So tax rates are based from town to town on per pupil spending. So the districts that spend less do see a lower tax rate, and the districts that spend more do see a higher tax rate. So there is that connection there. Where the connection gets lost for taxpayers, and the reason the system is so hard to understand, is that it is an incredibly Byzantine, complicated system. It is really hard to walk people through, basically the steps that it takes from, the school board building a budget and bringing it to all of us to approve, and then the legislature adds it all up, and we have to raise that amount of money. And then it goes through all these complex equations based on, weighted per pupil spending and, the values of homes and the common level of appraisal. And so I think that one of the challenges before us is to acknowledge that the system is broken, acknowledge that taxpayers feel incredibly frustrated because they want to support their schools and they can't afford these kinds of increases, and try to create a system that is more transparent. So when voters go to the polls, they know how it's going to impact their tax bill, I think, in a much more tangible way, and they can make informed decisions. And we also got to find ways to give school boards, kind of unshackle them from all the things that they can't control. One of the biggest drivers of school increases this year was healthcare premiums, going up 16%. Those aren't negotiated at the local level. Those are negotiated at the state level between the teachers union and the school board's representative. So school boards basically get handed to them, like, here's what the healthcare premium is going to be this year. There is nothing they can do about that. Vermont's school buildings many of them are 60 years old. They're starting to get to the end of their useful life. School boards are faced with some really difficult decisions about, like, do we defer maintenance? Do we try to replace the roof? What can taxpayers afford? What are we going to do with our building? The excess spending threshold is what you were talking about, Ivan. It was in the bill this year. It was in a very effective cost control mechanism. I think it'll work again as a short-term fix while we basically work to, I hope, overhaul the system from top to bottom so that it's responsive to comments like Steve's.
And just to add, Ivan, you're right. The disconnect is right. We passed a very responsible budget here. The 5% increase, tax bills go up 12.5%. Other towns have, I think it was Fairhaven. Anyway, it doesn't matter which town it was, but some towns had almost no increase in their budget because they're trying to hold it low, but they still went up because they're paying for everybody else's. And that system just doesn't make sense. There's not a direct enough connection. That's what Kathleen is talking about. There needs to be a direct connection between the decisions the voters make at the local level and the tax bill and that. But there's a lot of, we have to involve, and Kathleen said this early, we have to involve everybody in this discussion. It's not just because it's going to mean changes. When you change the system, it's going to mean changes at the ground level, and everybody needs to be involved in those discussions. As one of my friends in the legislature put it to me, with regard to the need to, maybe look at closing. Everybody wants to close somebody else's school. So that's the discussion that's going to have to go on. And some of these decisions are going to have to be made at the local level because I don't think it's right for us to be making them all. I think we need to set the construct in place, but a lot of decisions, a lot of discussions are going to have to take place at the local level.
It's interesting because we talk about closing the small schools, and several of my grandchildren went through the Sunderland School program. Yep. And got an excellent education.
And there is mixed data about whether there's real savings. So there's mixed data. So which is interesting.
So
And I just want to reply one more time
That's
to
a
the,
great
to the
point.
comment that we raised people's property taxes. If the legislature had done nothing this year, but simply fund property tax rates the way we usually do, tax bills could have gone up by more than 20%. We worked our butts off to get those bills down as low as we possibly could within the system that we have right now. Is the system broken? Yes, it is.
Thank you, thank you. Other comments or questions? Don?
I was hoping if you could just give us a quick explanation of the education tax credit and where does that money come from?
Sorry, another, well, it comes from the education fund. So when we're figuring out, basically, when the people at the Agency of Education or the Joint Fiscal Office are doing the math and saying how much money, we need to raise, they factor into that the amount that the state awards in property tax credits for households who are income sensitized. So basically, it's all part of the equation, Dom. So I think, as a lot of folks know, if you have a household income of less than $128,000 a year, you qualify for some level of tax credit, a property tax credit. And so the lower income you are, the bigger credit you get. And it's basically all just a part of the calculation, Dom.
So it's not actually a fund, and I knew it was based on,
It's not like a separate fund.
okay.
Yeah, so we say, okay, the school budgets are going to cost this much. We're going to give this much money in tax credits to our lowest and most moderate income Vermonters. Transportation's going to cost this much. We want homestead property rates to be as low as possible. So, let's see if we can bring in some money in another way without impacting property taxpayers. One thing we did do this year was we boosted the amount of that credit because that will provide direct relief this year to families who need it the most, who are full-time Vermonters. So we took.
Lowered the family income levels.
No, we kept the family income levels the same. We increased the amount of credit that they would get. So all the same ways to qualify, but folks are going to get a bigger credit this year because we're trying to soften the blow as much as we can on full-time Vermont homeowners. So we boosted the amount of that credit.
And how would they get the credits?
You file, I think a lot of folks in this room have probably done it. It's a property tax credit that when you file your taxes, or even if you're lower income and you don't file taxes, you should still go online and find this form. It's a two-step process. You go to the Vermont Department of Taxes and you file your homestead claim. I'm sure.
I did that.
Yeah, you file your homestead claim, and then there's another form that it tells you to file so that you get your credit, and that just shows up automatically on your.
Yeah, we got it from the state the other day, actually.
And if you didn't get yours, Steve, you should follow up, because that.
Okay, we're going to keep this moving. Thank you all for trying to keep it concise, and
We did not succeed in keeping it concise. I'm sorry about that.
getting back to the agenda,
It's the Stratton Foundation, it's the Stratton
I
Foundation,
have a
not.
question not related to their discussion. I thought Seth was going to address it in his talk, but he.
go ahead, you've taken,
And it would involve both the select board and Seth. It's in reference to the program that Seth had brought to the Green Mountain Road residents from the Stratton Foundation. And spent hours on it. Seth doesn't know where it is.
Yes, I do.
Well, that's what I expected you were going to.
But it's not relevant to what we're. It's, I'd rather just talk to you offline about that.
But it's not just me. There are 41 of the homeowners.
I'm happy to
Yeah,
come with people. We're working.
yeah, I'm going to.
Well, he said he was waiting for town approval.
It's, this was a legislative report on what they've
Okay.
been working on during.
He said he was going to address it.
No, no, I
And,
didn't.
hopefully he'll,
No. I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't think it's.
yeah, we've got a lengthy agenda ahead of us.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of directions we could take on this.
Not that way.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
The next agenda item is to review the Housing Task Force applicants and possibly appoint members to the committee. Scott, you want to lead us in on this?
Well, the select board talked about at the last meeting what they wanted to do, and people had submitted applications to join the committee, and we're at that point now that we should probably appoint people. And Jonathan's laid out some of the applicants that are listed in your packet information. People that have submitted applications, and he's made some recommendations, and I suppose all of that's open to discussion.
Okay, yeah, we're in receipt of your recommendations, John, and just so that people know, we've received interest from 5 community at-large applications, John Burnham, Tyler Gebhardt, Cindy Luce, Joanne O'Connor, Maureen O'Connor, and not necessarily related. From the select board, Jonathan West has been interested from the beginning. From the Planning Commission, there are 2 members that are interested, Leslie Berg and Leon Ward. From the DRB, there are 2 members interested, Tim Waker and John Watanabe. We talked about having a 7-member committee with 1 member from the select board, 1 from the Planning Commission, 1 from the DRB, but we also, at the same time, that would leave us with 4 slots for at-large members from the community. But we recognized that there may be a situation where a member from one of those boards could be considered as an at-large member if they brought some weight to the community. Jonathan, do you want to speak to what your recommendation is?
Well, and beyond the actual applications that we received, there were, I think, probably about half a dozen or more other folks who were considering putting in an application and were interested, which I think is positive that we have that much interest. I think, to look at the folks, at least on the side of the at-large, my recommendations were for John Burnham, who's previously served on the previous Housing Task Force, Cindy Luce, who is the Executive Director of Habitat for Humanity, so it brings a nonprofit focus. Joanne O'Connor, who is a sustainability advocate, she's also very interested in grant writing, and John Watanabe, which, as you mentioned, although he is a member of the DRB, he's also a member of the DAB, and he has experience in rental and condo markets. He is a landlord himself, so it kind of brings a full breadth of experience. On the executive board side, my recommendations were for myself, Leslie Berg from the Planning Commission, and Tim Waker from the DRB. I think it's great to have Tim as a chair coming from the DRB. Leslie Berg has an extensive network of folks in the community that is working to help build on, as we've discussed. I think Gordon is on the same page with this, at least about the importance of education and making sure that our folks in our community know what we're working on. And then, of course, myself. You know how important I feel it is to me. I did make a suggestion only in the fact that there were 3 members. Tyler, who is a project manager and a builder with Windy Mountain Builders. Maureen O'Connor, who is a community volunteer. She's an advocate for housing insecure here in our community. She volunteers for Meals on Wheels. She does have a BA in public administration, and she was educated from Michigan in urban planning. So she has a pretty wide breadth of experience. And Leon, because as a member of the Planning Commission, Leon has a very creative and creative mind and has a lot of fantastic ideas for development. So, you know, the decision between having Leslie be the representative versus Leon is certainly a difficult one. I know both of them, and I think they both have different skill sets, but I think either one would be beneficial. I think Leslie, because of the network that she's starting to build, would be of interest to be as a continued member of the board. I did receive feedback from other members of the board, this board, and I did make some adjustments based on that.
So the proposal is to have some alternates.
Yeah, sorry, so the
And-
idea.
And you just meant the three that you just mentioned.
So Tyler, Maureen, and Leon, you know, I heard the discussion. There were a few meetings that they struggled to get quorum. And I think that was one of the reasonings. And the other part is that I think it's really important that we also try to grasp the knowledge and expertise that those three have from the different areas. A builder, you know, someone with education in urban planning and public administration, and Leon with a very creative design skill set that I think is very beneficial.
And of course, in this proposal, Gordon Black would be the staff support for the.
I guess I have a couple of concerns. My first one is I think that if you have 11 people in attendance at every single meeting, it's going to run into a lot of the similar problems that we had with the last group of people, that there's just way too many people there. And then I also would strongly prefer Leon over Leslie, and if Leslie wants to be an alternate, then I would be supportive of that. But he's, you know, has a lot more tenure on the planning commission, and I think is a much more effective board member.
If there's other comments from the board, I'm going to take those first.
I'd like to side with Heidi's preference of Leon over Leslie. Awesome.
Steve, go ahead. Voting.
Just a couple of things. I think that the organizational structure that's proceeding is good. However, we've got to involve the taxpayers. We can't just involve these board members. They have to have a forum or an input in this process. We can't just, it just can't be this board. Secondly, why have we looked at Joe Miles' proposal yet to see what he is doing? Now, you don't have to answer me. However, if this is going to solve much of the housing crisis here in town, why are we proceeding with this board and wasting the time? I think it's a great organization, but where are we? Is Joe's project ready to go? I've seen parts of it. I think it's great. He's willing to come forward. He's willing to do it. Let's do it. Are we wasting our time?
Steve, I want to be very clear. I saw some comments that you had made directly about Joe's project. I think the project that Joe is doing is fantastic, and I applaud him for taking the steps that he's done. And I think it behooves us as an organization to take what Joe is doing and help others in our community do that. So find the resources, find the folks, work with Joe and how he's done it.
I don't think you should do that. Let him do his project.
I'm not, first of all, this committee is an advisory committee. It is to bring together resources. It does not have the capacity to enact laws or ordinances. It is simply to find, with the taxpayers, the folks who are in our community, our businesses, our nonprofit organizations, bring them all together with folks who are directly connected to our community and these boards, to find ways that we can all work collectively to better, not to stand in the way, but to help us all collectively. And again, we're not going to step in and say, oh, Joe, you know, the Housing Task Force is not going to step in and say, Joe, you can't do your project. There's no legality around that. We are literally an advisory committee trying to build resources and solutions so that more people who may not think that they can do these projects have that capability.
Any other comments? Do we feel that we're ready to make the appointments and form the committee?
I still want to say that I personally, I understand your, both Jan and your understanding or request to potentially look at swapping out Leon. And again, Leon and I worked together, and we are good friends, and I believe that there's a lot of camaraderie there. I think, personally, I think that Leslie, because of her interest in housing, is a stronger choice. Because I believe she's already doing a lot of the organizational work.
I guess my hesitation with that is that she's not been on the planning commission for very long. And you're looking for somebody that's representing the planning commission and the work that they've done. And that's, I think, a really important component of this. And, you know, she's been on it for a couple of months.
I agree with Heidi and Jen, and I think she should be on an alternate.
I would hesitate at the alternate thing too. I mean, I'm just talking from experience. Kath, I think that we were on that original housing task force, and it just became almost impossible to get through meetings because there were so many people that wanted to speak. So I would caution against having too many people on the board.
Well, that could be.
Victoria, you were also on the original committee.
Not original.
Well, some generation of it.
2.0.
So a recommendation or a concept for consideration is, and John Burnham, if you're still on the call, I can't see from this distance, but speak up. I'm wondering if is an opportunity to benefit from all the candidates' strengths and what they could possibly bring to the task force, and have working groups. So you have that core task force with their members, the appointments, the representations, and you have working groups. So this might also address what Steve's talking about. My personal recollection is this past task force, they were public meetings. I'm wondering how many you were able to attend to bring your skill set and knowledge to those public meetings. I'm not asking for a response. But my point is to have those working groups, and that way community members, residents, voters, and additional planning commission, is it planning commission? I can't remember. But all those other people that have talents and skills can help out in those working groups.
Well, I
I
think that's
recollect that, John, right, we had some working groups, and that way we were able to tap in. They might not come to the meetings, but we were able to connect with individual residents that we knew had skills. I think I'm going to sit down.
That's a great idea, Victoria, and I think getting the committee in place is the first step, and then they can work on how they're going to address smaller working groups or larger processes that would involve greater segments of the community. That's something to be decided later on. The first step would be to get the formal committee itself. And I'm listening very closely to what Heidi said about the group being too big, and it's hard to stay focused. Is there a head? John Burnham. You're muted, John.
Okay,
It's a collect call. I accept the charges.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Victoria's correct, and I think that once the committee's formed, they'll make those types of decisions, and I think it does, there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of information to collect, so, you know, those, we'll call them subcommittees, groups, whatever it might be, can certainly incorporate so many of the people you're talking about, as well as others in the community that want to be part of the process. They won't be in the actual meetings that happen, the overall, other than maybe as a attendee, but I think it's a great idea, and I think that'll be flushed out in the process.
Yeah, and I would just say that obviously my overall concern is that just as we've done in the past with other boards, having someone who can, step in, I think in the case to make sure we're maintaining quorum was my original idea. But if we can be creative, I think that's something that we should entertain.
Is Leslie more interested in being on the committee versus Leon? Is Leon more interested in being an alternate? Do you know what their level of interest is? And
I think they're both equally interested.
I have a comment.
Okay, I'll allow it.
I know I bring this back again and again, but the successful thing that we had when I was on the board was to bring in a moderator and do the forums with the different tables as such. So I would encourage that. My other question is, Jonathan, you're elected to the Senate. What happens with that position?
I'm serving the community that I'm elected to serve, which is this town of Manchester, and I will do it as long as the residents of this community feel that I'm doing a good job and feel that I'm properly serving this community in this role.
will you entertain a motion?
Can I just say one more thing
Oh,
before?
well, I did. I thought you
I
had
guess-
said what you wanted to say.
Well, no, I mean, I guess I would just say, I would be willing to support the top 7 people with the one exception, the switch between Leslie and Leon. But I don't know that I'm ready to vote for a slate of 10, just because it's not really what we talked about before, and I just think it's gonna be it's just gonna make it a lot more unwieldy, in my opinion.
Do the alternates, are they expected to be there at each meeting, or are they used mostly in the case that there's not a quorum?
Was that at me?
No, just in general.
We do have alternates for some of the other boards and commissions where it's allowed by statute. It's where we have trouble reaching a quorum. It's something that's helped, but I think typically the alternates wouldn't participate that much in the discussion if they attended and weren't needed as part of the quorum, but they'd be able to attend and maintain that familiarity with what the board is doing. And the board could create their own guidelines as to how the alternates would participate if a full quorum of the 7 members is there. If we decide to go that way, I could go either way. I think maybe at this point it's cleaner if we go with 7, and then consider the alternate situation later. If we're in a rush to get.
Alternates can be, they can be appointed.
Yeah.
At any time, I think. So, I personally don't have a problem with the alternates. I think the chair would probably lay that out just the way you said it. Knowing the chair, if it were to become 10, but I'm perfectly willing to go with Heidi's proposal, and then decide later if an alternate's needed.
Sounds good to me.
It appears we have some consensus on that. Are we prepared at this point to make the appointments? Which means, you want to make a motion?
Well, I was just saying, are you ready for a motion? I
Oh, I'm prepared to entertain a motion, if there is one forthcoming.
Okay, I'll make the motion that we recommend the Housing Task Force Committee assignments as Jonathan West from the Select Board, Leon Ward from the Planning Commission, Tim Waker from the DRB, John Burnham at large, Cindy Luce as at large, Joanne O'Connor at large, and John Watanabe at large.
A second.
And administrative support would be Gordon Black.
Yeah, I think that's,
Just, yeah. So
this is actual appointments to the committee. It's been seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We have I assume we have a committee at this point because these people have all expressed a desire to serve.
That's fine.
Hold your applause until the end of the meeting. The motion to adjourn usually gets a lot of applause.
And Joanne's with us tonight.
Congratulations.
Let me get back to my agenda.
Glad there's so much interest. That's great.
Okay, we've, on several occasions, entertained the idea of amending department application fees. Typically,
You forgot.
oh, we didn't do the town's land use ordinance. We have to, are we in receipt?
Receiving
Yes. Have we received that from the planning commission this time?
tonight, we're receiving that tonight.
Okay. And then potentially set a date for a public hearing.
Correct. Has to be 15 days, which is just at a minimum,
Yep.
less than 20. And 15 will put us just over our next meeting on August 6th. So we could do the following meeting, August 20.
Okay. And what we're talking about is the open flags discussion.
So the planning commission proposed and approved changes to the land use and planning ordinance section on July 8th. And so now if we set a date, we could hold one public meeting. And the way we can do it is we can set it up at the beginning of the agenda, have the public meeting at that time, close that, and if there's no major changes, we could approve it in that meeting.
Yeah.
More effective.
So in the warning, it would
We have
not only warn the discussion, but possible
yes.
possible action. Perfect. That sounds reasonable to me.
Sounds.
What's that date again?
August 20th?
20th, yeah, that should be.
I may be away, but hopefully you'll have a quorum.
We should have an alternate.
Yeah, we should have an alternate.
I'm away too, just as an FYI.
Oh, boy.
Well, it just sounds like it could be the three of us again.
I could do the 27th.
I'm gonna be gone the 27th.
Okay.
When's
We could move it up, too.
We could move it up.
Move it up a
That would be
week?
Then we'd have 2 meetings in a row.
Yeah.
good. That's fine. Come on now. It might not be a very long meeting.
If we do just that one, can we do one issue or is that too annoying?
Well, then we'd still have to have a meeting on the following.
The election is on the 13th.
We can
Oh.
cancel it, it's okay. You can take precedence.
Being used to it.
We give it to you.
We could do it on the 20th, and if you guys see it in advance, send your comments. You too.
Oh, can we do that? I'm not sure. Where will I be? Somewhere, I'm gonna be somewhere overseas, so
Me too.
it might be difficult to zoom in unless you had an earlier.
I suspect that we're going to be holding the hearing and making a decision that evening. We're perfectly within the authority of the board, as long as there's a quorum here to do that.
I'll be here.
I could send an AI representative on the computer.
my business, AI stands for something completely different than you're talking about.
Okay, let's keep moving it along, people. So we're keeping on
So-
the 20th?
Let's do the 20th. We'll just knock out.
Just a regular
All right.
scheduled meeting. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so does that require a vote?
Does not.
Okay.
And one quick question, if, now that this is in play, are the people who are displaying flags not in violation?
We won't address that until after this, the 20th.
Okay, I didn't know whether or not it was from the time that there's an open hearing or whether or not from the time we set, because a lot of this was based on trying to make sure everybody could do that without being cited.
But, I mean, this has been ongoing for quite a while, so
Yeah.
it doesn't make sense to come down 2 weeks ago and then change it anyway.
Yeah,
And as an FYI, the planning commission is gonna talk about sandwich boards too next.
okay.
Not at the same meeting.
No.
Yeah, this,
So I've been at the planning commission meetings of this, so I'm fine with it. Yeah.
Get this done first.
okay. It's okay, so we've set that public hearing for the 20th. It'll be at the beginning of the meeting. And there most likely will be some sort of action taken within that meeting. Now, agenda item number 8, which is what we're talking about here is amending the zoning department application fees. They've not been increased for over 10 years. Quite often, we update fees every year. There are, with some of our other commissions, we have the water board and we are the sewer board. There's actually a mechanism in place where that escalates every year based on a CPI. But that doesn't happen in every instance. I think we have some recommendations.
We do, and you'll see them 3/4 of the way down your page there where it says adjusted permit costs, that section. It shows what we currently charge, like administrative fee is $80, a DAB application is $100, DRB is $180. And, you know, really the proposed changes are not that much. Administration is just about up 35, DAB up 40. But the one I'd like to address right now is that DRB application. Peter and his crew has come up with a $230 proposed cost up from $180. I'd recommend that we even go higher on that. I just hate to address this each and every year and say, you know, we're behind already, so why bring it up and still be below where we should be? We checked around and it's hard to compare apples to apples on some of these applications, but a couple that we did find was Woodstock and Ludlow down below. You'll see their DRB is $350 and $300. So, you know, if we do approve this tonight, I'd like to see us change that $230 recommendation to something a little higher, maybe just short of $300, maybe somewhere in there. And what triggered this discussion, Heidi, and you're going to talk, we've hired a software crew, a vendor, that's going to help facilitate applications. And so people will be, once we get this fully operational, people will be able to go online, see what they need to complete it online, and see where their application is in the process. And all this is going to speed things up. And it'll also show our staff what's lacking in the submission without having to talk with people constantly back and forth. saying,
But there is a
"This
cost
Yeah.
to that service.
That's correct. So, you know, if you remember in the budget discussions, we built $3,000 in for that software. The price actually has been a little bit more, but we split it into 2 fiscal years, so we're still going to be under budget. But these fees will, an increase in them will help offset that budget cost.
I don't think there's any reason why we can't go to 300 on the DRB fee.
Yeah, especially if Woodstock and Ludlow are up there too.
I guess this also brings up for me, well, first of all, I guess when you're gonna do a cost increase, we also include a percentage column too, so just because if we're basing things on CPI or percentage, like I think it's a better way to present it, but, this is bringing up the, issue that I had with the parking fee that they were saying, the Christos people, when they were paying for parking mitigation, they were basing it on a number from, I think, 7 or 8 years ago. I guess, and saying that was kind of the precedent, and we hadn't addressed that, and I think this came up in other meetings where we were talking about income on municipal properties, that we haven't really looked at that. I would love to just, I think this is a great step, and I think that we are, obviously very much behind in terms of updating this, and maybe it's not an every year thing, but it should be every few years, and so I guess I would also encourage you to get the other departments to kind of scrub through some of their things and update them, and just because you don't want to have a situation where somebody's holding us to an old number and expecting it to be that way, but I'm fully supportive of this. I think it's great.
Yeah, understanding that for most and many applications, this would be a one-time fee. Other fees that we charge are recurring, like water and sewer fees are every quarter. We used to let that slide for 10 years like this has, and hit people with a 30% increase, because it should have been going up by 3% every year, but we didn't do it, and we have to make an adjustment. So the idea was to build in an escalator on those kind of recurring fees. This is a little different. This is a one-time fee that offsets our departmental cost in providing, the taxpayers providing that service to applicants. And there's a lot of arguments as to who should pay for that. Applicants will come in and say, well, I'm not asking you to do this for me. We used to have no zoning fees whatsoever, because the thought process was, we're imposing this on you, the applicant, on behalf of the rest of the people in town, therefore the rest of the people in town should pay for it. And then there's a completely opposite side to that is, well, you're the one that benefits from submitting this application. The other people in town want to impose some kind of limits on this, but they don't benefit from it. You're the one that should bear the burden of the cost of providing the service. I just offer that as something to keep in mind as we're doing this. I am fully in favor of having the fees somewhat reflect what it costs the town to provide that service to these applicants. That's always been my perspective on this.
Is the, I probably mentioned this before, was the contract is there any sort of annual contract on the, or like a long-term contract on the software?
There is, it's less than the 4,000 initial startup.
So
I think it's in the second section.
Well, yeah,
It's under.
Yeah, but is there like a, like, in some of the software contracts I have, it's, your price is locked in for 4 or 5 years. or
Gotcha.
something like that.
I don't
Yeah, the
know
question
off
is,
the top of my head how many years.
I mean, this shows an annual cost of $45.50 for this service, the software. Is there an escalator in that?
Right, because that would
Yeah.
then dictate how often we
Right.
want to take a look at revisiting these.
So,
But that's not the only
Yeah,
cost
we-
that
it's-
we're,
we-
that's not the only cost that we're covering with.
New employees,
with
we've,
these fees.
all these different, like healthcare of the employees, all the other things. that we do.
Everything.
Yeah,
the advertising costs have gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We advertise in the journal.
So I think Heidi's idea of
For these meetings.
reviewing it, I mean, for every department, it should be part of their annual.
I mean, we just did the one for the rec.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And quite often these are driven by, with the rec department, you've got, it's a direct correlation. You've got programs that are, we've approved a budget for what we're going to spend to provide those programs, and then we look at the fees that we're charging, and they don't cover that expense. And that, so because of the budget was approved, the recommendation comes in to raise the fees by this much, and it never really fully covers the cost, but it's based on escalating costs in providing the service. We have the same escalating costs in providing the service to people that are applying for zoning permits. Health insurance being one of them for the people that are working on it.
Setting the expectation that this is going to happen.
So I think the $300 maybe makes sense for
I'm fine with that. Nice, clean number.
Yeah.
Do we need a motion for this?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to make a
That's it.
And that's it.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's 5-0. And it's approved. Oh, look at that. We're down to town manager updates.
Yep, some quick updates. The letter to the PUC, the Public Utilities Commission, went out.
Yeah, yesterday.
Yeah, I've been on vacation, so I'm not sure
Yeah.
what day it is.
I signed it
This
yesterday.
week.
I signed it yesterday morning.
Yes, you did, thank you. And Marilyn got it out right away, so it's been submitted and filed with the PUC. Green Mountain Lining just completed their work over the Green Mountain State lines. What we did was we hired this vendor to come in and look at the lines and camera the lines for us with the idea that they could seal going behind and also pinpoint any major problems we might see. The lines that Dick Hayes had put in years ago were actually very good, very well done. It's a couple of other offshooting lines that were done by subsequent contractors were a little less of that quality. But anyways, they fixed what they could, and they've also helped us determine that we're going to need 2 new manholes out there. So we've ordered them already. The reason being, we want to get this stuff done. We want to get the mountain and do this before we pave the curves. We don't want to dig up the pavement. So that's just the update on that. And that reminds me to remind you that we have a public site visit at Green Mountain Estates at 5 p.m. On August 6th, 2 weeks from today. So we will meet at the site, at the roads. That's the purpose of this is for the select board to be laying out the roads. So the select board and any public that wants to attend can look at the roads. The monuments from the surveyor will be completed by that time. The survey work is all done, basically. And our attorney from Middlebury will be down also to answer any legal questions that you might have. Then we would close that site visit and we repair back here at 7 p.m. and open up the public meeting at that time. So any of the public questions that might come up during this site visit or that they might already have, they would ask them at the 7 o'clock meeting when we open up the select board meeting and the public meeting.
I won't be at the 5 o'clock part.
Okay.
Are we meeting, I know obviously there, but are we going to meet at the end by Burn Burton's?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
Yeah, it's a horseshoe,
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
but the Success Building.
Yeah.
We could park it. Got it.
I got a question.
Yep.
Does there seem to be anything right now that you can see that's going to interfere with the paving at all? Is there anything in the road, manhole, or lines that have to be dug up that interfere right now, as you can see with the camera?
Right. No.
I noticed Doug Coleman was down there viewing the camera. I'm just wondering if there's anything that's going to interfere with the paving part of it.
As long as we get those manholes ordered, which we did yesterday, and installed before the paving occurs.
So there is some manholes in the roadway. Is that like Valley Pass or? Are they on-
These are going to be 2 brand new manholes.
Are they in?
They're on dead-end
Is it
line.
going to interfere with the paving? Is it in the road? Or is it offset on somebody's,
No, I believe it's in the road.
it's in the road?
Yeah.
Okay, as far as, you do know where in the development?
I don't have it I don't have it right in front of me. When we meet in 2 weeks, I can show you, and Eric will be there also, and Jeff.
I know he's called us before on meeting and having stuff done, but I'm just curious why there was a lot of issues and mistakes made years ago with Herman and the engineer. All of a sudden, Dick Hayes' work is fine, but yet you have Herman, and it was engineered by Ellis Speed, but yet that wasn't done right. But you're trying to blame the Hayes for it, basically.
Well, we're not blaming anyone.
What we're doing, Kenny,
How come that project wasn't engineered? If you knew we were going to take it over in the future, how come that project wasn't engineered by your town engineer so it was done right?
well, because there was never any intention when most of that was done for the town to ever take it over. That wasn't something we were doing at that point in time. I think that was always,
I think you
I
were
think that was
after
always
us.
Dick's
You were
plan,
after us right after
but
the
it wasn't,
Canadian
but
died.
when we
Take it out.
when we purchased the water company from Dick and the Marsden family, which it was originally from, that wasn't part of the purchase, and there was never any overture made that we were gonna take that at any point, but Dick clearly wanted us at some point to take that over. But there's no, I've checked into it, there's no document, there's nothing signed that there may have been discussions that took place, but there was never any agreement that was
The original,
no,
the original development plan for that development
yeah.
was the town would take that road over as a gravel road. That was in a subdivision plan. And you came to Dick Hayes, he didn't want to turn it over at the time, you changed your policy, now it had to be blacktop. And Dick Hayes refused to turn it over to you, so this is how this whole thing started. The pump station was in a project status report that you were willing to take over the pump station as part of the Wallace Road deal. You've taken out as paved road. So for you to step there and say there was nothing ever in an agreement, I disagree with you.
Well, but none of that ever transpired, and at some point, it's not an agreement, and this select board is a different select board that was there at that point in time, and we're not bound by any decision that was made unless there was an agreement that was signed by both parties, and then we're contractually obligated to follow through on that. But there is no signed agreement, and this select board has to deal with what's in front of them right now based on today's world. And be happy. It's all gonna happen.
It's not by handshake.
Well, I know it's not.
Well, if you do it by a handshake, it has to happen quickly. And otherwise, it's a different cast of characters that come along, and they're not bound by that. Things can still be done by a handshake, but it's,
I wouldn't do that.
no, but it has to happen quickly, because things,
Learn my lesson there.
things change.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's gonna happen. I mean, I dragged my feet on this, to ask Doug Gilbert. I mean, I've been one of the ones that's saying, how do I justify to the rest of the people in this town that this is a good deal for them to take this over? But there's a number of reasons now that we've been down this road. There's any number of reasons, and we're all well aware of them, that this needs to happen, it needs to take place, that we've decided it's going to take place, and it's gonna take place. So, it doesn't have anything to do with agreements or not, that may or may not have happened 40 years ago. It's based on what we're talking about today, and it's gonna happen, Ken.
It's a difference between 800,000 and a handshake.
Yeah. Well, we've landed in a spot where I can talk to anybody who's not associated with this particular neighborhood and say, this is why this makes sense.
I just want to let you know too, I didn't build a development.
Yeah, I know that.
So I don't appreciate being attacked by anybody that works for this town.
Well, I hope nobody from this
Eric
town.
Severance, he wouldn't let us, he put us think about us taking rags down to the thing. He said, I don't want your effing rags.
Oh, gosh.
And I'll say it with your TV, well, that's what he's told me, you don't want our rags.
But that was before, we
But
got them, they're taking them.
Yeah, but I don't. The thing is, it was engineered by Dufresne and Henry, and the whole system basically, at our times, started to failure. Because you had no idea what people were putting on their toilets, you couldn't control it. So then the pumps all of a sudden won't handle it. So now we gotta, all of a sudden we're gonna refit with, I guess, a knives pump, German pumps, but you're gonna have to sharpen them knives. Knives get dull after a while. But
You're way intimately more familiar with it than any of us.
I'm just telling you, I didn't build a development, and I don't appreciate being attacked by you people at this town, the way you attacked us. You've got some kind of deal going on with this aquifer protection area, but yet you've had hydrologists do the studies, and that's not the case. The case is there's no underground aquifers that are flowing north to south. It's going to contaminate water, but you've constantly haunted us on the sewage, the rags, and everything else.
And
That's
that's,
not true. That's not
well,
true.
it's a real concern, and we have to
It's
base
a
that.
concern, but it's not true. And when we start believing that licensed people, we have to believe the engineers, we have to honor the civil engineers because they're licensed. But yet you people on these boards don't want to listen to hydrologists, licensed hydrologists, 2 people have done studies that say there's no way that development, that pit or whatever is going to contaminate your town
No,
water.
it's not in the aquifer. It's not in the aquifer.
Oh, yeah, move forward.
But yet you say it's in the aquifer. We're in the aquifer.
It's not.
We're going to
It
contaminate
is
the town
because
water.
the town labels it an aquifer, but it's not in the aquifer.
That's,
Because they can go by what they decide.
I
even
don't
if
see that being,
Hydrologists don't decide.
well, you know what?
see that, but that's being fair.
Nothing on that's gonna get
Process
changed,
more.
is gonna get changed this evening, but I appreciate your concern, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to express it to me, but, there's nothing we can do to change that this evening, and it wouldn't change quickly
It's
because
almost like you bought the water company, you put your water down there. I heard you had a chance to put it over on rec center, and then all of a sudden you undermine everything Dick Hayes had with this property.
you can remember the process that we went through trying to find an aquifer that would provide the kind of, the level of flow that we needed, and it was a very difficult task. And you can also remember when the springs would dry up in August, and we couldn't serve the water.
So there was no-
You went to
there was no
Burn.
adequate source
You can
of
remember.
fairground
You can
where it
remember.
would involve somebody else's land.
You can remember salamanders coming out of the tap at Burton. I know I can. I mean, it's not perfect. It's a much better system than it was. We have to protect it. We have to take into consideration all the experts that are telling us what we need to do. And there may be some, okay.
Experts?
Yes.
Experts?
All right, well, we're not gonna get into.
We're not listening to the hydrologists.
Okay, Ken.
They're licensed people, you do not want to listen to them. It's just like we could talk about this deal with Roofville.
Okay, well, we're not gonna that's off the topic.
Okay.
What we're doing is
There's a lot to say about
under
that.
under the town manager's report, under the town manager's report, I'm gonna tie this up. We're going to visit your neighborhood in 2 weeks and take a look at it. Yeah, we just scheduled a meeting to do that.
Because
Okay, no, we're done. Next.
All right, and my final update is, at the last select board meeting, we were talking about the planning commission's recommendation to have a consultant come in and educate the boards on utility applications and cell tower sightings. And so, with the help of Wilbur Rice, Annette Smith is coming to the select board meeting on the 20th.
Oh, great.
And she will talk to
You'll
us.
miss it.
She's the director of Vermonters for a Clean Environment.
You'll be able to watch the rerun.
Yes, and we'll get information for you if you have any questions in advance. So that's all I have tonight.
Also, Peter has been talking to Propagator, thank you. And it looks like we may be able to get something going very quickly before the end of the month on putting those wheels in motion, and it may not be that costly when it comes right down to it. Peter just sent us an email
It's great.
today. Anything else under town manager?
No, sir.
Do we,
Other business.
do we have any other
I do
business?
have 2 items. One thing that was brought to my attention was a question about noise ordinance. It's my understanding that we go by the state statute, and is it 10 or 11?
I think it's 11.
I think it's 11, and I think we do cite that in our. in the
Reference
zone.
it, yes.
We reference it.
Yeah.
Okay, I wanted to be a little clear about that, and I did tell the person that it was available online to look at, but I would try and find out exactly what that was. Secondly, the section of roadways between the Italian market and the small roundabout, the mini roundabout at the bookstore, during evening now, the horse show's here, unbelievable amount of business going on and traffic, foot traffic and everything else, and the speed at which people are going through there, despite the fact that the roadway is narrowed by the sidewalk dining, is pretty remarkable, and all you have to do is go and eat outside and watch what goes on. And I am wondering whether or not we can do possibly do some temporary speed bumps and a sign that says this is a slow zone during the heavy summer months and when we have sidewalk stuff out there. And I don't know exactly how that would work, and I don't want to get into a discussion about all the other areas where people are speeding. I just want to be clear that this is specifically about that one section, because there's so much traffic, there's so many people down there during that period.
I don't disagree that there's a lot of traffic. I would argue maybe that the traffic causes everybody to slow down a little bit.
Well, no, that was my argument when I advocated for the sidewalk dining, and they do, but a lot of people soar through there at that between say 7:30 and 9, and I just think if there's something we can do to say this is a hyper traffic zone.
I will check with the police department on that and see what.
Victoria.
What we can do.
Yeah.
Also, on that subject, we just bought two new speed boxes, which records data. They had a buy one, get one type of deal. We thought it was a good deal. So we've got two new ones coming. They actually were delivered today, so.
They do have an impact.
They do.
Victoria.
To your point, Greg, about parking in that area and speeding and traffic control, I saw a crazy diagram of really thinking outside the box for an area of parking just like that. Whereas instead of fronting into the parking spaces, you actually change the diagonal and you back into the parking places so that when people come out of their parking place, you're pulling out with traffic instead of backing in. Somewhere in my files, I might have a picture of it and I can forward it to you, Scott. It's really outside of the box thinking, but as of a few years ago, it was considered, I don't know, best practice, but recommended to look into.
Yeah, and again, I thank you for that. I'm just really concerned just about the speeding through that one section. And, but another person brought to my attention another idea, which would be eliminate the angled parking altogether and make the sidewalks much bigger and only having parking on one side.
And putting green space like you did on 11 and 30 Depot.
Right. But but again, I just want to reiterate, this was about speeding. And by and large, looking around, speeding is not a huge issue, but in that one particular area, it just seems people don't pay any attention. And I know it's happening elsewhere, but this is so heavily trafficked. Thanks.
I won't bother getting into my anecdote because I know people want to get home. Any other business?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Our next meeting is August 6th,
5
5 p.m., Green Mountain Estates.
p.m.
I'll be there.